So today we're going to talk about embedding the GDPR into the SDLC. So we've got two acronyms in there already. So I'll get to explaining all that in just a little bit. So this is me. The only thing that is actually of importance here is that I work for a company called Torion, and the reason why that is important is because my boss, Sébastien de Leersnijder, he's one of the project leaders of the OWASP SAM project. And one of the other people working within Torion is Siebe de Rovere, and he's a GDPR specialist. And neither Siebe or Seba could make it, so I'm here doing actually their talk. And the reason why we're here is because we had a number of projects going on that needed, or where our customers asked from us, can you come and help us to get GDPR compliant? Because GDPR is a legislation, so you can be compliant with it. And there is another part of Torion where people are working to implement secure development life cycles with customers. And when we do GDPR compliancy programs, we get a lot of questions on how do you actually fit this in a secure development life cycle. And when we're doing the secure development lifecycle projects, we get in a lot of questions like, okay, but what about this GDPR thing? What do we need to do to get compliant there? So a bunch of us sat together and we came up with a way to actually do both of them, which is what I'm here to present today. So we're going to talk on how do you actually embed a GDPR program into a secure development lifecycle, and we're using the OWASP SAM project to actually guide the whole process. So when we talk about the GDPR, there is a couple of things that we need to realize. First of all, it is a regulation, and for the non-Europeans in the room, in Europe there are two types of things that the European Union can put forward. One is a regulation, which means that is the same as a law, which means all the member states need to comply with it. The other thing they can do is they can put forward a directive, and a directive is something that then all the member states need to put into a national law. So the GDPR is a regulation, meaning it is one law for the whole of the European Union. And when they created the law, the United Kingdom was still part of the European Union. They are actually still part, they're just in the process of moving out. But the politicians within the United Kingdom have promised that they will implement GDPR within the United Kingdom exactly the same. So it doesn't really matter that there is a Brexit when it comes to this one law. The law will become active on the 25th of May of next year. And although that might seem a long time, we will see when we go further within this process that if you're starting now and you're a rather large organization, you're going to have to really make an effort to get everything done by then. So how did this privacy law, privacy regulation come to be? Well, there was a privacy regulation within the European Union. It was made in 1995. And of course, a lot of things have changed since then. In 95, we had the internet, but it wasn't all that big. And there was no tracking of users and things like that. And things like social media were virtually non-existent. So when the legislative people sat together to look at what could be improved for the privacy of the European citizens, they figured out that this old privacy law simply didn't fulfill any of the things that it should be doing. So the main goal of this GDPR legislation, and we need to always keep that in the back of our head, it is to give back the power of the data to the people to whom the data belongs. So we're talking about privacy regulation, so we're talking about people, and they wanted to make sure that all these organizations, be it companies and governments that have data on you, that you are still the owner of the data, that you're still in charge of which data do they keep from you and what can they do with it. Now, when we look at personal data or privacy-related information, often the definition that we have for it is far too narrow. So the GDPR legislation states a number of things or points to a number of things as being privacy-related information, things like your national identification number, your first name, your last name, all that stuff. That's kind of logical. But they put a number of things within this legislation like IP addresses, your surf history. If you're using your employer's email system, that is actually also considered to be private data, because chances are you're gonna send some emails that are not related to the workings of your organization. So just by the new definition of what is personal data that they put into the GDPR, a lot of things will need to change. For example, IP addresses, I think many people do not realize that that is now considered privacy sensitive information, and you need to actually protect that information. So when we look at the actual legislation, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but there are 7 principles that we could talk about for a whole day. And of those 7 principles, we try to say which are the things that your legal team will take care of and which are the things that the IT departments should be interested in, because there are things that they need to do in order to be compliant. So when you look at justification and transparency, meaning you need to tell people what you're using the data for, and you need to be transparent about that, that's something that the legal team will primarily be involved with. There are some other things, and I'm going to take the proportionality principle as an example. The proportionality principle clearly states that when you keep data from people, you can keep only just as much data to achieve the goal that that application or the thing that you're building is meant to do. If you start to think about that, and you look, for example, at an organization like OWASP, if you become a member at OWASP, you'll want to have the @owasp.org email address, so they can ask you for a username to give you that email address. Probably they're going to ask you for your first name and your last name, because you need to send a payment to them, and somehow they need to figure out that that payment is coming from you. Anything else that they're going to need to ask you, like where do you live? They might want to ask you where you live. They're going to need some kind of explanation why they need that data, just to give you a membership and an email address. They might have a valid reason to do so, so as long as they have a valid reason, it's perfectly okay. But you'll need to somehow document why you need all this data on people. So the 3 principles in the middle are covered by privacy by design, and then you've got confidentiality and accountability, which we noted down as being information security. Confidentiality is the one that we all understand. It's like my privacy-related data must remain confidential. There can be no breaches of information, no leakage of my personal information. Or at least we're going to try to stop all those leaks from happening. Accountability means that the organization that is keeping the data will need to have a whole range of things documented, so that if there ever is a problem, they can show, like, okay, but we did all these steps, like we needed to have his home address because we needed to send him a physical invoice. So they need to make sure that they keep tabs on all these things. It's almost like an audit trail for all these types of things. Of course, if you take the last 5 principles together and you look at, for example, a DevOps world, that's basically what you're going to cover in a secure development lifecycle. Now, we put forward here 3 of the articles of the actual law, and we put some things in bold and underlined them because they might be interesting to have a quick look at. And if you just read a number of those words, it says things like implement appropriate measures, the necessary safeguards. It talks about something by default. It talks about varying likelihood. It talks about another likelihood. It talks about an impact. It talks about risk. So all these things all point to the same thing. That is, how are we going to identify risks? And once you identify them, of course, if you identify a risk, you need to put some kind of a mitigation against it. So take note of the numbers, or I'll come back when we look at the mapping to the SAM project, because we did a mapping of SAM towards all the articles, but that's going to come a little bit later. First, we still need to define exactly what the secure development lifecycle is. Now, we have drawn a development lifecycle that we feel is so generic that it is actually valid for waterfall and most of the agile methodologies that we ever worked with. So when you start to create an application, the first thing you're going to do is some kind of a design. In agile, the design will be smaller. If you do waterfall, you're going to make a complete design up front, but some type of design activity is going to happen. Then you're going to actually build a thing. Hopefully there's going to be a testing phase before you go to production. Now, those 4 steps are the typical steps that is done during a development lifecycle. Now, what do you need to do to make it a secure development lifecycle? Well, in each of these phases, there will be some actions that you will need to take. During design, typically that is threat modeling. Now, in order for developers to be able to build secure code, you will need to provide them with secure coding guidelines. I think in most curriculums, even today, if you are taught to be a programmer, there is little to none educational material on how to do secure coding. So if you get in a developer straight out of school, or you get in a developer with a lot of experience, there is no guarantee that he actually knows how to do secure coding or how to produce code that is resilient against attacks. So you'll need to give them some guidelines in order to do so, and in most of the time you'll probably want to do some type of code reviews. Code reviews being using automated tools and manual code reviews, because the two of them need to complement each other. You can't review all the code manually, but these automated scanning tools, the static code analyzers, can do only so much. They can't find every type of attack out there. During the testing phase, we do what is called the dynamic testing. Other words for it are things like penetration testing and things like that. So the testing phase is actually a validation of the 2 steps that came before. This is an important principle to keep in mind, because whatever you do, for example, when you do threat modeling, at some point in time you will need to validate the threat model itself, like did you do a good enough job? And a little bit later, probably when the production environment is set up, you need to validate that the thing that was set up still complies to the threat model that you initially made. Of course, when you go into production, you're going to need some type of configuration guidelines, especially in many of the agile methodologies, because they release often as possible, and you don't want to run any risks there that you pick up a configuration that was meant to be in development and then ship it all the way into production, and then to notice that, oh no, we don't have our TLS active anymore, because in development you typically don't use SSL TLS. This whole process needs to be, of course, supported by enough training, because you need to teach your people how to actually do this. And if you think about this a little bit further, we try to keep this diagram simple. So what did we draw? We draw one release cycle. We didn't even draw actually the maintenance on it, or the reporting of bugs and things like that. And in most organizations that we're going to work in, there's going to be more than one application being built. So in order to make sure that the limited budget that you always have to do security is spent in the right places, we are going to use a SAM assessment or a SAM track. What is SAM? It's a Software Assurance Maturity Model. So it's an OWASP project, so it means it's open source. You can just go and download it. It's split off into 4 larger functions, and then each of the functions is split off in typically 3 domains. So you've got 12 domains in total, and these are the 12 domains that you need to do actions in order to create secure software. These are also then the 12 domains that we want to put our GDPR against and say in which of these do you need to take a certain action. Now, there are a number of things in SAM that we did not see on this image because we try to keep it simple, and that is in our picture of the development lifecycle, we saw most of the construction and a lot of the validation. We didn't see anything about operations except the secure coding guide, but that's just a guide. And we haven't even touched on the whole governance thing, which is of course the starting point of a SAM, because you want to do this across your organization. The whole purpose of doing this using SAM to create yourself a maturity model is to discover which applications or which teams are doing well, which teams are doing not so good when we talk about the security of the stuff they're building, and which of the applications that those teams are doing are actually the applications that are important enough to do a lot of protection on. In order to do so, each of the domains will have 3 levels. So for each application or each development group, you need to decide which of the 3 levels they need to achieve or they need to attain. This of course depends for the most part on the applications that they are building, what is the priority or the categorization that they have within your organization. So if we look at these 12 domains, we sat together and we try to map all the articles that are in the GDPR to each one of these domains. Now, I'll quickly switch back to Article 25. Article 25 talks about privacy by design and by default. I'm using Article 25 because just by the title you get a fair idea of what's in it. And if you look at the places where it's mapped, of course, we're going to look at privacy by design or the design of things when we look at threat assessments, when we look at secure architecture, when we do design reviews. So there is a quite a logical way to map all the articles that are in the legislation to the different domains that are used within SAM. Now, we're going to look at each one of the domains, and on the left we tried to enumerate, or we took the enumeration that was available of the things that you're supposed to do within that domain for each one of the levels. And in the second column, well actually the third, the one that says GDPR, we try to map which are the actions that I need to put at the same level in order to comply with this legislation. Now, it says here in my slide notes that I should insert some kind of a lame joke about SM, but I'm just gonna skip that. We're just gonna look at the actual content, and we're looking at strategy and metrics, which is usually the place where you want to start with the GDPR approach, because in the end, you will need to, within your organization, decide how are you going to answer, how are you going to address the GDPR, and you want to make sure that you have somebody who has the role of data protection officer. So you'll need a DPO. I'm not going to read to you all the things that you need to do. The slide deck will be available, and not only will the slide deck be available, but all this information has already been donated to the to OWASP, to the SAM project. So if you go look at the SAM website, I think you should be able to already find it there. If it's not there yet, it's simply because they're still reviewing it and it's not published yet. But you can ask for it at any of the project leaders. I know that Brian Glass is here at the conference. You can contact him and ask him about it. He knows about it. So one of the most important things that is on this slide, it is when you look at the level 2, is the personal data inventory. This is actually really an inventory, so a list of all the pieces of personal information that you have on people and where you are using them. They already talk here about a DPIA, so privacy impact assessment, out of which you can do 2 types, but we'll come back to those in a little bit. When we look at the policy and compliance, of course, there's going to be loads of work to do here. In the end, GDPR is legislation and you need to comply to the law. So it's only logical that there is a lot of work to do here, primarily to do with creating policies and things like that, and making sure that the GDPR is actually used to drive the compliance to this legislation. So if you start a GDPR project, the only goal of a GDPR project is to comply to the law in order to mitigate the risk that there will be fines in the future should there ever be a problem or somebody wants to sue you. Now, when we look at the education and guidance, one of the first things you will need to do is start to include these GDPR requirements in your secure development processes, in your coding guidelines and things like that. Now this is usually the point when we're only 3 slides in, where developers start saying like, okay, but this looks like a lot of work. Exactly what is this thing that we need to do? And one of the biggest changes in this legislation is that from now on, everything will be opt-in. So if you register on a website and they want to send you some marketing information, then these things cannot be coupled. So there must be a way for you to opt in. It cannot be opt-out, so they cannot check this text box for you. They must keep a record of when exactly did you opt into it. You must give them a way to opt out again. And all these things that are happening, you need to keep an audit trail of it. So if you start explaining that to a developer, he starts to realize, okay, we need to do that for every application that we have. That's going to be a lot of work. And you need to be completely ready by May. So this is usually around this slide, people start to realize that they should have probably started a lot sooner. Then the second level, and there was a lot of argument about this one. We say we're going to use GDPR to raise awareness about a number of things. We had a lot of discussion about it because many of us felt that this should have been actually on the level 1. In fact, all the developers in your organization should be aware that there is such a thing as GDPR, and everybody else in the organization should also be aware. Because there are a number of things that you really need to be careful about, because you don't want to be leaking all this privacy-related information. But in order to let it much more nicely on the levels that already exist in SAM, in the end we decided there is a logical way to put this, and it will be for the level 2. It was a more logical way, a more logical place to put them. Now if we look at threat assessments, and then the first thing you usually do in a threat assessment is you're starting to look at threat modeling. This is the part where you start doing your privacy impact assessments. And there is a smart way to go about it, which is first you create some kind of questionnaire that you send out or that you have all the applications fill in. And then you're going to make sure that you perform a privacy impact assessment for those things that actually need it. Because maybe a number of your applications don't actually need a full privacy impact assessment. Now, what is that exactly? If you look at an impact assessment, then you're going to try to answer a couple of questions. The first question is, what is this thing that we're building? The second question is, what can go wrong with what we are building? And the third one is, what can we do about it? Now, for those of you who are used to threat modeling, those are exactly the 3 questions you ask during threat model. It doesn't matter which methodology you use, you'll always answer at least these 3 questions. So, in fact, from the point of view of threat modelers, a privacy impact assessment is nothing more than a specialized threat model. So, if you're already doing threat modeling within your organization, these threat modelers will be exactly the kind of people you want to do these assessments, because they already have an understanding on how to do this stuff. Now, there's also a number of security requirements, again, that you will need to put in. In reality, that means that you're going to create a document with what is then called non-functional requirements that you're going to put forward to each application, saying, okay, from now on, or if it's a new application, before you can go to production, these are the requirements that you must comply to, or we cannot actually go to production. When we look at the security architecture, one of the most important things that was mentioned in the law, it says that privacy should be there by design and by default. These are, it's mentioned in one sentence, but it's two things to think about. And of course, if you need to do privacy by design, you need to put it in your architecture. When you look at, so the 3 green blocks that are following, these were the validation steps, so the testing steps. All the stuff you did so far, of course, still needs to be validated, because you can ask people to do a number of things, but that doesn't mean that they actually do it, or that they have done them correctly, or that they have done them well. So validation will also for GDPR play quite a big role. And if you look further into the implementation review, for example, you'll start noting that on line 2 is usually the place where automation starts to happen. For the GDPR, we actually have nothing. So at this moment, we don't have tools like a static analysis tool that can actually help us find problems with the GDPR, which means it's going to be all manual work. However, when you do your dynamic testing, your pen testing, or your functional testing of an application, there are a number of tools that you can use to actually partially test the compliance. There is one mentioned on the slide, there is one that is not mentioned on the slide that we often use during a pen test, and that's Ghostery. Ghostery is a Firefox plugin, and it can tell you everything you want to know about the cookies that are being used and the tracking that is being done and things like that. It can automatically block them and things like that, but you can use it as a research tool as well. So once we get into the operational part of the development lifecycle, or the application lifecycle, I should say, because operations isn't part of the development lifecycle, then of course you end up on level 1 with the data protection officer should be notified of all data breaches. And then on the second level, again, a point of great discussion, it says the organization must be able to identify a data breach. There was a lot of discussion because in order to notify a DPO that there was a data breach, you must of course first know that there was one. But why is that put on level 2? It seems rather illogical, but in order for you to know that there was a data breach, you're going to need to do a lot of monitoring. In reality, we're looking at organizations that have a SIEM running and that probably have a SOC, so a security operations center, that is manned 24/7. Because that is the point, if there is a data breach, that you will hopefully catch it. If you didn't prevent it, at least that is the point where you should be able to see that data is being exfiltrated or data is being read when it shouldn't be. So that is the reason why that is on level 2, implementing a central way to collect logs and to have log monitoring to build a security operating center. That is not something that is done for most level 1 applications. Of course, you still need to do also the environment hardening, which is also something that was already mentioned during the development lifecycle. So these configuration guides now need to take into account that privacy should be there by default. That is something you might, depending on how you build your organization, so you might be able to put that in a configuration somewhere. We also still have some operational enablement that we can talk about. And most of the things that you're going to do there on the level 1 is follow-ups. So whatever happens within the organization and a data protection officer is notified, that's just not enough. I mean, I can notify him, he still needs to do a lot of actions and do follow-ups and things like that. So that was quite quickly, we went through the 12 domains where we mapped the GDPR actions that you need to do on the SAM project. Now, how did this come about? Well, the first time we encountered this is when our customers started asking for it. And at a certain point, we had an ongoing project with a customer that did not only involve SAM assessment, but they also had some PCI regulation that they needed to comply with. And in the end, we made a case with them that since they need to comply with GDPR anyway, and they're already doing all the effort to look at a SAM, so a maturity model, why don't they just take GDPR in the same project and don't add any more overhead costs to something that will already be a large project? So luckily for us, the customer agreed with us, and we had this integrated approach, and we did the project with them. And some of the things that were special in this project was that we had a number of security champions in the development teams and a centralized team within the security group, which is part of the IT department. So we were coming at it from two sides. We were not telling developers to do things. We trained security champions who were most of the time lead developers or senior developers, and they went back into their team and they said, guys, there's a bunch of stuff we need to do for this law, and if we want to comply with this law, we're going to do it in a good way, so that not only do we comply with this law, but we're also going to make our applications a lot more secure. Because they needed to comply with GDPR, but they also needed to get their PCI compliance checked. One of the things that was created was an anonymized questionnaire that is in the meantime shared with the SAM project. So this questionnaire to do the privacy impact assessment threshold has been open sourced in the meantime. Now, of course, if you don't do a huge project like that, or you don't have a compliancy project running at the moment, you'll still want to do something with the GDPR, and you can't just bolt it on. A GDPR is quite an invasive thing to do, as we saw within the 12 domains, so you really need to integrate it in your secure development lifecycle. The easiest way to do it, and it works very well, of course, in anything that works in agile methodologies, is you could create a whole number of GDPR epics and GDPR user stories that you inject into the backlog, and that then will slowly but surely be implemented. And every time a sprint is done or if you're using Kanban, a story is put into production, there is a chance that your GDPR compliance will get a little bit better. It works exactly the same if you are still working in a waterfall way, because all these GDPR epics and user stories that you create, the use cases that you create there, you can just give them to a team that's working in waterfall and say, okay, for your next iteration, the next release that you're gonna do, for which you have 4 to 6 months to get that one ready, here is a bunch of new requirements. Now let's go sit together with the business and see how many functionalities we need to drop for you to actually get all this stuff in. Because remember, it needs to be fully compliant by May. So probably that's not the release that is being developed now, but the one that comes after is probably only going to be released after May. So you're going to need to have everything ready in that release. Now, we did notice with some of our customers that there is a bunch of advantages doing it this way. And we've had customers that used the GDPR project that they were doing to actually start implementing a secure development lifecycle. So they were IT departments, development departments that never got the budget or that never got the resources to implement a secure development lifecycle, but now GDPR is something that they needed to do. So we told them, okay, the easiest way to be GDPR compliant is to have an SDLC. So that way there was a number of organizations that got some extra budget for the GDPR compliancy, and they managed to get an SDLC for free. There were a number of cases where we improved the software development lifecycle a lot because of all these GDPR activities. Just doing these privacy impact assessments or sending the questionnaire also to developers can be used as an awareness tool. And a number of the things that you do in the SDLC, loads of that stuff is documented, and documenting things is one of the things you will need for GDPR compliance. So it's just a quick sidestep. If something happens within your organization and there is a data breach, then your national privacy authority will step in. And the first thing they're going to ask you is, show me what you did to prevent this. And then, of course, also show where it went wrong. Now, if you do a lot of these things and you have it all documented, then there is a high chance that this national authority will say, okay, we realize that it will be virtually impossible to create a product that's 100% secure. You did everything, like if you do everything that is mentioned in these 12 domains and you do it well and you have documentation on it, you've got quite a high chance, or at least there is a chance, that this national authority is going to say, okay, you might get a fine, but it will not be the maximum fine because you didn't make any flagrant blunders anywhere. Or maybe in the beginning, if the legislation has only just been active, you might still get away with it. In the end, it's legislation. So when a fine needs to happen, probably there's going to be some kind of a court case. And in a court case, you can argument your case. So if you have all this proof, then you might make a good argument, and at least you should be able to get away from the maximum fine, or maybe even a fine that is 0, so no fine at all. There are some key success factors that you will need to have in order to pull this off. So if you're working within an organization that has an IT department and there is a small security team within that department, you're going to need to build relations. The data protection officer in most companies that we talk to, that is a person that comes out of legal. So, or that comes out of a safety and risk department if there is any. So you need to make friends with your legal department, because they will say, they can actually say to any of the applications that you have, any of the development teams, you guys need to comply with this. And your business that needs to put up the money for all of this, they might try to push back against it, but in the end, if the legal team says, no, no, we need to comply or this is not happening, then you've got a far bigger chance to get all this stuff done. So you want to make sure that the DPO that you have, that you be friends with him, that you talk to him a lot, because he's also going to be one of the drivers to make sure that security can get implemented and that some of the friction that you might have, because you come in as the IT team saying people have to do stuff, but you can't put a budget against it because that needs to come from the business. So there is some friction going on there in many organizations. Well, your data protection officer will be the best advocate you have to improve or create a secure development lifecycle. Because once you have that, his life will become a lot easier. Like he's going to be sure that you at least are logging security-related events. And if you log security-related events and next year he gets his budget to do a SIEM and a SOC, then at least he knows that that data will be coming in. He doesn't have to wait another year before all applications start logging security-related events. So you need to make sure that you talk to more people within the company, and that is always a good thing to do when you are in a security team. We tend to be on our island and we tend to do things like pen test and then have a report with lots of findings and then give it to a developer and hope things get fixed. Things simply don't work that way. But with the GDPR, now you have a good reason to actually just walk into a person's office from legal or the DPO and have a discussion with him. Most of them will be perfectly happy to accommodate you. Now, what are the next steps? Well, we're going to share the mappings. If I understood correctly, that has already been done in the meantime. And on the last OWASP summit, the one that was held in 2017 in London, there were some workshops that improved on this or that actually worked on this stuff. And there's going to be another OWASP summit in London 2018 where there is going to be a SAM track, because SAM is one of these projects that will always go to a summit. There will always be people working on this during the workshops. So I advise you, if you're interested in SAM, or if you want to help, or if you have a need that you need met by SAM, with or that has to do with or nothing to do with the GDPR, make sure you go to the OWASP summit. You need to pay for it, and it's 5 days of you actually working, but there is a lot of subject matter experts there that can help you get that in, and from then on, not only does everybody have that content, but at least you will reach your goal. If you're not able to actually get that stuff done, because you might not be an SDLC expert, but you might know a thing or two about the GDPR, or the other way around, go to the OWASP Summit, work with these people. They will be happy to teach you all they know, and there will be lots and lots of outcome and improvements, and that way we make sure that our open source community keeps growing and keeps improving.